The wind had a way of making the mountains feel alive. It slithered down the slopes in long, mournful howls, rattling the loose tin on abandoned mining shacks, sweeping snow into shifting dunes that erased the road in minutes. In late February 2012, Denali National Park was deep in winter's grip, the kind that did not just inconvenience, but killed. At 6:42 p.m. on February 19th, the National Park Service received the first call. A man's voice, strained and breathless, reported that his sister, 29-year-old Naomi Harper, had failed to return from a planned 2-day solo hike. The caller, Sam Harper, explained that Naomi had been visiting Alaska from her home in Oregon, chasing the solitude she claimed she couldn't find anywhere else. She was experienced years of backcountry trips, winter camping, glacier crossings. She wasn't reckless, but she was also stubborn, the kind of person who treated cautionary weather reports as suggestions, not orders. Sam's concern wasn't the hiking itself, it was the weather. 48 hours earlier, an unexpected low-pressure system had swept down from the Arctic Ocean, slamming the Alaska range with 50-mile-per-hour gusts and blinding snow. The forecast had gone from flurries to whiteout in less than a day. Temperatures dropped to -25 without wind chill. Anyone caught out in it, even someone like Naomi, would be in danger. She'd left a note on the windshield of her rental SUV, parked at the Savage River trailhead. It listed her planned route, up the Savage River Canyon, cutting toward a ridge that connected to the old Thorndike Ranger Station, decommissioned for nearly 40 years, but still standing as a skeletal relic of early park patrols. From there, she'd loop back toward the road. The route was 18 miles. In summer, with clear skies, she could have done it in a long day. In winter, with snowshoes, she'd wisely budgeted to. Sam had expected a call or satellite ping by noon on the second day. By evening, there was still nothing. The park dispatcher took down the details: height, weight, clothing colors, gear, list. Bright red down parka, Sam emphasized. Coyote fur hood trim, and she's got her old yellow climbing pack with blue straps. She stands out in snow. She also carried an avalanche beacon and a small sidearm, a .357 she'd bought after a black bear bluff charged her on a trip in the Canadian Rockies. Within an hour, Ranger Specialist Grant Ellison was behind the wheel of a Tat, treads grinding up the frozen road toward Savage River. He'd been in the Park Service 19 years. He'd seen hikers go missing in summer and return shivering but alive. He'd also helped carry out bodies frozen in the posture of their last desperate decision. The cold didn't forgive mistakes. By the time Ellison arrived at the trailhead, night had smothered the land. The SUV sat alone under a crust of snow, its windows frosted, the note still under the wiper. No fresh tire tracks, no footprints beyond what looked like Naomi's already softened by spindrift. The snow was knee-deep where the wind hadn't scoured it to bare ice. The initial search was a triage effort. 3 rangers, all on snowshoes, traced the faint depressions of Naomi's trail along the canyon. The tracks were visible for less than a mile before they vanished under a wind-sculpted ridge. The storm had erased her passage like chalk wiped from a board. Ellison clicked on his radio. "Lost the trail," he said. "Copy," came the reply. "Thermal drones up in 10. From above, the drone's infrared scan painted the canyon in black and white, searching for the heat signature of a human body. It found nothing. No campfire, no tent, no movement. Just the slow breathing of the earth. Wind-shaken spruce. The hunched silhouettes of caribou. By midnight, wind chill was pushing -45. The searchers pulled back to base. The next morning they expanded outward from the last known track point, fanning across the canyon floor in ridgelines. Midday brought the first clue. A single snowshoe, bright yellow plastic, with black webbing, half buried in drifted snow. The binding was broken clean through, the metal buckle bent, as if it had been stepped on or struck hard. 10 yards away, they found something else. A small red stuff sack containing a stove fuel canister and a bent titanium mug. No tracks connected the two finds. Just white emptiness between them. The working theory began to form. Naomi had fought through the storm until a gear failure slowed her. She may have tried to shelter, or had been forced off her planned route by wind and poor visibility. The old Thorndike Ranger Station sat on higher ground. It would have been a logical place to hole up if she could reach it. Ellison and two others broke trail toward the station. They found it near dusk, a dark, boxy shadow on the ridgeline. The roof sagged under decades of snow loads, but the walls still held. A warped door hung open, banging softly in the wind. Inside, snow lay in rippled drifts across the floor, blown through broken windows. Rusted bunks lined one wall. A cold iron stove crouched in the corner, its pipe long since collapsed. There were no footprints, no disturbed snow, no sign anyone had been here in years. Ellison felt the familiar heaviness in his gut, the awareness that the person they were looking for might be only yards away, hidden under snow, unreachable until spring thaw. 3 days later, the storm cleared. Helicopters swept the ridges and canyons. Search dogs worked what ground scent the cold would release. The dogs found nothing. No tracks, no clothing scraps, no body. By the 7th day, the active search wound down. Naomi Harper's case went cold, officially labeled presumed deceased exposure. For 8 years, the Thorndike Ranger Station sat, as it always had, empty, creaking in the wind. Snow came and went. Ptarmigan left their tiny Kamash-shaped tracks in the drifts. A wolverine was seen once, loping past in spring. In early August 2020, Ranger Grant Ellison returned, not for a rescue, but as part of a structural safety inspection. A contractor had reported sagging beams and floorboards softening under rot. The park planned to dismantle the building before it collapsed on some curious hiker. Ellison, now 47, and grayer, at the temples, worked with a 2-person maintenance crew to catalog anything worth salvaging before demolition. They started with the roof, prying away rusted tin and weathered spruce planks. Then they moved inside, pulling up warped boards to check for rodent nests and moisture damage. The air smelled of old wood, dust, and something faintly metallic. It was under the southwest corner that Ellison's pry bar hit something solid, not stone, not wood, a hollow clang. He crouched, scraping away dirt and splinters until a rectangle of corroded steel emerged, flush with the ground. A hatch, maybe 2 by 3 feet, its edges black with old tar sealant. There was no handle, just 4 rusted bolts at the corners. Old storage, one crewman guessed. Ellison shook his head. Never saw this in the original plans. They worked the bolts loose, shearing 2 off entirely. When the hatch finally gave, a draft of air seeped up, cool, stale, with the faintest undertone of something sour. Ellison played his flashlight beam down into the space below. The light fell on the top of a wooden crate, its lid warped but intact, and on the crate's surface, half hidden under dust, lay something impossible to mistake, a scrap of red fabric, dulled with age. The color of a down parka faded by time and buried in darkness. Ellison's breath fogged in the beam. He glanced at the crew. "Nobody touches this," he said. "We call it in." The call reached the Denali law enforcement office at 11:14 a.m., relayed with the clipped professionalism that masked the hair prickle of what the ranger crew suspected they'd found. By the time Special Agent Meredith Kane arrived on scene, the Thorndike Ranger Station was cordoned off with yellow tape strung between weathered spruce trunks. Kane was no stranger to cold cases. Before her transfer to the Park Service's Investigative Services branch, she'd worked homicide in Anchorage for 12 years, enough to know that rural Alaska swallowed evidence the way the ocean swallowed ships. Snow, wind, and time erased mistakes. People could vanish without a ripple. Ellison met her at the doorway, his face tight. "It's under the floor. Steel hatch. Didn't know it was there." They ducked inside. The hatch gaped black in the dim interior, the smell seeping out stronger now. Not the wet rot of wood, but the dry mineral note of something organic, long absent of life. Kane knelt at the edge, her gloved fingers tracing the metal lip. "This been sealed a while. 8 years, at least," Ellison said. "Probably more." Evidence techs moved in, their boots muffled against the warped floorboards. They lowered a camera into the void, its flash strobing the dust. On the monitor, the grainy images resolved. The crate, its wood bleached pale, the scrap of red fabric, crumpled and frayed, and something else, a corner of yellow nylon, folded awkwardly beneath the crate's edge. Kane recognized the combination. Instantly. "Parka and pack," she said. The hatch opening was too narrow to lift the crate straight out. Instead, they widened it, prying up adjacent planks until the gap allowed 2 men to brace the box and haul it upward. The wood groaned but held. As it cleared the floor, the air in the cabin shifted, and a wave of cold, stale odor rolled upward. Like the inside of a freezer long unplugged, inside the crate lay the remains of a body curled into itself, knees drawn toward chest, the long bones of arms folded awkwardly. Most of the flesh was gone, reduced to parchment-like skin in some places, bare bone in others. The red parka clung to the torso, zipper half open, fabric stiff and salt-stained. Beneath it, the blue-strapped yellow pack bulged against the body's curve, as if placed intentionally before the lid closed. The skull was turned slightly to the side, jaw parted. The left maxilla, the upper jawbone, showed a thin line of hairline fractures, as if struck. Around the neck bones, the faint loop of a cord was visible, braided nylon flattened by years of pressure. Kane didn't speak, she just leaned closer, eyes narrowing at the cord, the fractures, the way the pack was positioned. Every detail felt staged, but for what purpose she couldn't yet name. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the eaves like the cabin itself was remembering. The remains were lifted onto a gurney, every motion deliberate. Kane noticed Ellison standing, a little apart, his gaze fixed on the parka. "You were on her case," she said quietly. "Naomi Harper," he confirmed. "Same colors, same pack. But," he gestured at the crate, "if she died in the blizzard, why is she under the station floor? Who put her there?" The evidence was secured for transport to the medical examiner's office in Fairbanks. Alongside the body came every fragment from the space below the floor, soil samples, 2 rusted nails, and a crumpled sheet of paper wedged into a corner. When flattened in a plastic evidence sleeve, the paper revealed water-blurred handwriting, a fragment of a letter or note. Only 3 words were legible. "He waits here by evening." The sun had dipped low, dragging the temperature with it. The ranger station, now officially a crime scene, stood alone against the alpine slope. Kane lingered inside, studying the bare hatch opening. The wood surrounding it was different from the rest of the floor. Newer boards cut cleaner, less warped. Someone had replaced this section deliberately, long after the building was abandoned. She crouched, running her gloved fingers over the beam ends. On one, carved shallow into the grain, was a shape, 3 intersecting circles, perfectly even, the inner lines overlapping like a geometric knot. The edges were sharp, not worn. She'd seen something like it once before, etched into a basement wall during a double homicide in the Matsu Valley. That killer had called it a sign of the threshold. Outside, one of the techs called her name. She stepped into the pale light, squinting against the wind. He held up a sealed evidence bag, its contents dull silver, a brass key, ornate, its bow engraved with the same 3-circle pattern. "Where was it?" she asked. "Under the sill west window," he said, like someone wanted it hidden, but not too well. Kane glanced back at the cabin door, at the empty shadow of the hatch. In her guts, she felt the weight of something she'd learned early in her career. In Alaska, The land erased the careless, but it preserved the deliberate. And whoever had placed Naomi Harper beneath that floor had been nothing if not deliberate. The key sat on the stainless steel evidence table in the Fairbanks field office. Catching the fluorescent light in dull glints, Kane studied it, while the medical examiner, Dr. Lenora Fitch, worked over the remains behind her. The three-circle motif was perfectly centered in the bow, the edges so finely etched it had to be machine-cut, not handmade. The teeth were worn but not jagged, a lock in use, not ceremonial. Unusual, Fitch said, without looking up. But you didn't call me in here for the hardware. Kane joined her at the steel gurney. Naomi Harper's remains lay partially reassembled, the parka and pack removed, bones cleaned of soil. The nylon cord was still looped around the cervical vertebrae. The knot at the rear fused stiff from time. Strangulation, Fitch said. Pre- or perimortem, likely the cause of death. Fractures on the maxilla consistent with blunt force. Trauma, not enough alone to be fatal. She gestured with a gloved hand toward the left forearm bones. These defensive fractures, she thought. Kane's eyes went to the parka. The fabric was slit under the right sleeve, edges ragged. Knife, likely. Also found this in the pack. Fitch handed over a small, sealed evidence bag. Inside was a steel thermos, the kind sold at outdoor outfitters. The surface was scratched deep, as if dragged over rock, but along one side, someone had carved letters through the paint. The letters were uneven, jagged from haste. STN-3. Kane's mind ticked through possibilities. Station 3. Fitch shrugged. Could be. It wasn't until late that evening, back in her office with the case file spread across her desk, that Kane connected the dots. Thorndyke had once been part of a chain of ranger outposts along the northern boundary of the park. Stations 1 through 4. Station 3 had been decommissioned in 1974 after a winter collapse. Its remains were still out there somewhere, buried under snow and alder, REGROWTH. She paged through the original 2012 case file. There it was, a brief note in Ellison's early field report. Old-timers say Thorndyke was linked to another post, by service trail, long gone now. No follow-up. The next morning, Kane met Ellison over coffee in the park HQ kitchen. She slid the photo of the key across the table. You ever see this pattern before? He studied it, brow furrowing. Not in the park system, but, he leaned back, eyes narrowing like he was pulling something from deep memory. There was talk, back when I started, about a set of keys for the old maintenance lockers. Each post had one, supposedly. But this carving never saw that. Kane told him about the STN-3 engraving. His reaction was immediate. Station 3's off limits now. Roof caved decades ago. Locals call it the sink. You want to get there, you'll need more than a snowmachine 2 days later. With August's thin warmth already bleeding from the air. Kane, Ellison, and a young field tech named Rowe pushed out along an overgrown trace of trail heading northwest from Thorndyke's Ridge. The land rolled in glacial hummocks, alder thickets clawing at their gear. Animal sign was scarce. The silence pressed close. After 3 miles, the tree line opened to a shallow basin. In its center lay the remains of a cabin half swallowed by moss and willow. The roof had indeed collapsed, the logs silvered and split. On the leaning doorframe, just visible under lichen, was the 3-circle symbol. Cut deep into the wood. Matches your key, Ellison murmured. Inside, the air was damp, smelling faintly of mold and something metallic. Kane's boot struck, a hollow note. She crouched, sweeping away rotted planks, to reveal a recessed steel locker built into the floor. The lock plate was still intact, and it matched the teeth of the brass key exactly. When she turned it, the mechanism resisted, then gave with a sound like a bone breaking. The hatch swung open to reveal a void barely 3 feet deep. Inside were 3 objects: a coil of nylon cord identical to that found around Naomi's neck, a folded oilskin bundle that unrolled to reveal black and white photographs of two men in ranger uniforms from the 1960s, and a small glass jar half filled with coarse, reddish granules. Salt. Roe guessed. Kane didn't answer. She was staring at the photographs. The men, mid-30s, hard-faced, stood in front of the Thorndike station, its roof still whole. Each wore a sidearm and a fixed, unsmiling gaze. In the bottom right corner, faint but legible, was the same three-circle mark, drawn in pen, on the photo's margin. She turned the photo over. In faded ballpoint, someone had written, "He waits here," as before. The same words from the crumpled note under Naomi's body. Ellison shifted uneasily. What the hell is this? Kane slipped the photos into an evidence sleeve, something that's been going on a lot longer than Naomi Harper's hike. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the thin, dry sound of snow hissing across old wood. For the first time, Kane felt certain that Naomi hadn't stumbled into random violence. She'd intersected with something that had been anchored in these hills for decades, maybe longer, and that whatever he was, someone had been waiting. The photograph sat in front of Kane under the flat, gray light of the records room. She'd spread them out on a blotter beside the oilskin and jar, letting her eyes run over every detail for the fourth time. The men in the images, both tall, broad, their hair cut in the clipped style of mid-century law enforcement, radiated the kind of posture you didn't fake. But there was no identification written on either photo. Only the pen-scratched three-circle mark and the back's faint message. He waits here. As before, she started with the obvious. Personnel rosters from the late 1960s. The park's archive smelled of mildew and dust. Its bound ledgers creaked when opened. In the winter of 1967-68, Thorndike Ranger Station had been staffed by two men, Warren Ames and Clifford Rudd. Ames was 36 at the time, a former Army MP. Rudd was younger, 28, transferred from Yellowstone. There was nothing outwardly remarkable in their service records, no commendations, no disciplinary actions. But when Kane pulled the maintenance logs for the same years, a pattern emerged. Multiple notations about unplanned winter patrols between Thorndike and Station 3. The entries were terse, devoid of detail, always logged in Ames's handwriting. She requested the weather records for those dates. On 3 of the patrol days, the park had been under blizzard or whiteout conditions. There was no clear operational reason for anyone to be traveling those ridges then. By late afternoon, she'd pulled the coroner's reports for the entire park region between 1966 and 1970. 4 cases jumped out, all listed as probable hypothermia, all found within 5 miles of Thorndike or Station 3. 3 were hikers. 1 was a prospector. In each, there were oddities, gear missing, but footprints showing no sign of a robbery struggle, reports of neck bruising attributed to fall injuries, and, in one case, the victim found in a shallow depression covered with snow. Their body curled exactly as Naomi Harper's had been in the crate. Ellison leaned against the doorframe, watching her scan the files. "What's the link?" "These," she said, tapping the photos. "Ames and Rudd. They were out in storms. For no reason. People died within their patrol range under circumstances no one could explain." Ellison stepped closer, peering at the 3-circle symbol. "Never saw that in any official signage." "It's not official," Kane said. "It's personal, and it's old." The jar of reddish granules proved just as strange. Lab analysis confirmed it wasn't salt, but coarse crushed mineral with high iron oxide content, the kind you'd find in certain riverbeds in the interior. Mixed in were flecks of something organic, possibly bone, though too degraded for quick ID. The next morning, Kane drove north to Healy to meet with retired Ranger Douglas Hart. He'd joined the service in 1972. just 4 years after Ames and Rudd's last winter. Hart greeted her with suspicion in his pale blue eyes, but softened when she laid the photographs on his kitchen table. "I remember them," Hart said, voice thin but steady. Ames kept to himself. Rudd, he was the talker. Friendly enough. But there were rumors. What kind of rumors? That they were running something between Thorndyke and the old three-post. Not freight, not supplies, just something they didn't want logged. Folks said you could see their lanterns up on the ridge on whiteout nights, 2 in a row, like sentinels, and sometimes, after a storm, you'd hear there'd been another death out there. Did anyone ever investigate? Kane asked. Hart gave a dry laugh. In those days, this was wilderness. If you froze, you froze. Nobody wanted to write it up as murder. She showed him the key. His expression tightened. You keep that close. There was talk those keys opened more than lockers. Some said the old stations were built over older things, not NPS built. Things the Athabascans wouldn't talk about. That night, back in her hotel room, Kane pinned a large map of the park region to the wall. She marked Thorndyke, Station 3's ruins, and the locations of all 6 unexplained deaths in the 60s. A rough triangle emerged. The points connected by high ridges and narrow valleys. Thorndyke sat almost dead center. The more she stared at it, the more one detail gnawed at her. The wording on both the note under Naomi's body and the back of the photograph. He waits here, as before. It was the as before that dug in. Before what? 2 days later, she had her answer, or the beginnings of one. An archivist in Fairbanks turned up a century-old survey map from before the park's official designation. Faint on the parchment was a mark where Thorndyke now stood, labeled only with a word in faded ink, Kayavik An, Athabascan term she would later learn meant the place where he waits. The archivist had circled the faded word in pencil, her handwriting neat and careful, Kayovik Gwich'in dialect. She'd also slipped Kane a thin folder containing transcriptions of oral histories, recorded in the 1940s by a territorial ethnography named Henry Ballant. Most of the transcriptions were fragmentary, but 3 mentioned the same name. One passage, translated loosely, read, "No one camps on the ridge where he waits. In the old times, men went up there in the snow, and did not return. We do not speak his name in winter. In summer, the ground there stays cold." Kane felt the words settle in her mind like sediment in still water. The phrasing had the ring of a warning disguised as tradition. She called a contact at the University of Alaska's anthropology department, a woman named Dr. Marla Shakes. By the next morning, they were sitting in a cramped office filled with shelves of bone casts and artifact boxers. Kayovik Shakes said, rolling the word softly, as if testing it against memory. "It's old. Predates most recorded Gwich'in migration into that range. The root Kaya can mean sentinel or watcher, and Vik means place of bait. The context here," she tapped the transcript, "is more supernatural. A place where something or someone waits for travelers. Sometimes it's a spirit, sometimes a man who is no longer a man." "Folklore," Kane said. Shakes gave a small, tight smile. "In your world, maybe. In theirs, it's lived memory. These stories are maps. Warnings. That ridge you're looking at Thorndyke now is avoided for a reason. The park built a station there without knowing the old boundaries." Kane left the office with more questions than answers, but she had a location with meaning that predated the ranger stations, and perhaps a reason Ames and Rudd had been drawn to. And she spent the next 3 days in the archives and county land records, chasing scraps. What emerged was a timeline that made her skin crawl. 1911. Mining survey teams report a weather anomaly near the ridge. Ground frost persisting into late summer. Compasses misreading bearings. 2 surveyors vanished during a blizzard. Their bodies are never recovered. 1934. A seasonal trapper is found dead less than half a mile from the ridge. crouched in the snow, as if hiding. His gears intact. Cause of death is heart failure, though he was only 31. 1967, 1969. 4 deaths within the Thorndike Station 3 corridor under Ames and Rudd's patrol. All officially listed as exposure, despite evidence of restraint or blunt force. 2012. Naomi Harper disappears in a blizzard. Later found under the floor of Thorndike, with signs of ligature strangulation. The recurrence of storms was uncanny, each death coinciding with sudden, violent weather. Kane began to wonder if Ames and Rudd had learned to anticipate it, and if the he in the notes and photographs was more than metaphor to them. On the 4th day, a call came from the lab. The degraded organic material mixed in with the mineral granules from Station 3 was confirmed as human bone, specifically fragments of a temporal bone from the skull. Kane felt a low chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Someone had been carrying a jar of ground human remains, stored in a hidden floor locker, next to rope, identical to Naomi's ligature. She brought this to Ellison. He looked at the photos, then at her. "You think Ames and Rudd were killing people up there in storms?" "I think they believed they were part of something older," she said. Maybe they saw themselves as she hesitated, choosing the word carefully. "Caretakers?" Ellison shook his head. "Caretakers don't hide bodies under the floor." That night, Kane returned alone to Thorndike. The demolition crew had halted work pending the investigation, so the cabin sat in perfect, echoing silence. She walked the floor, letting her flashlight trace the seams between the boards. At the north wall, opposite the hatch, her beam caught another carving faint under a layer of grime. She crouched, rubbing at it with her sleeve. 3 circles again. But this time, inside the central circle was a small crosshatch, like a doorway or barred gate. A gust rattled the warped windows. Kane straightened, the hair on her arms prickling. For a moment, she thought she heard something under the wind, a low, almost conversational murmur. But when she killed her light, the darkness pressed in with only the sound of air moving through cracked boards. She told herself it was the ridge playing tricks. Yet when she stepped outside, she noticed something she hadn't before. The old service trail toward Station 3, barely visible in the grass, was flanked by 2 upright stones. Not cut, not placed by the Park Service, just there. And each bore the same 3-circle symbol, weathered but still clear. As she stood between them, a ribbon of cloud pulled across the moon, and the wind shifted direction, carrying with it the faint metallic temps she'd smelled under the floor. The day they'd found Naomi Harper. She didn't step any farther down the trail. Not that night. The morning broke in a brittle, pale light, the kind that made the ridgelines look carved from bone. Kane stood at the threshold of Thorndike's door with her pack slung over one shoulder, waiting for Ellison and Rowe to check their gear. She'd decided to follow the service trail to Station 3 in full daylight, both for safety and because she wanted to see the land without the distortion of wind and night. The upright stones, she'd noticed the evening before, looked different. In morning sun, their weathered surfaces were pocked with frost-cracked veins, but the 3-circle carvings remained, one circle overlapping the next, intersecting perfectly, the lines too clean to be accidental. Lichen had grown thick in the grooves, the pale green threads making the symbol seem alive. They stepped between the stones, and the shift was immediate. The air felt cooler, the breeze still, but heavy, as if the ridge itself was holding its breath. Ellison noticed too. "Colder here," he said, checking the thermometer clipped to his pack strap. It read 37 degrees Fahrenheit. Just 50 yards back at the cabin, it had been for 4. The trail narrowed quickly, hemmed in by alders that clawed at their sleeves. Here and there, the remains of ancient planking poked through the moss. The old boardwalk laid down to keep rangers above the snowdrifts in winter. It was soft with rot but still recognizable, a thread of human order through the wilderness. A mile in, they found the first anomaly, A section of the boardwalk had been lifted clean from the ground and propped against a spruce trunk. Beneath it, in a shallow depression, lay the rusted shell of a metal drum. Kane crouched to examine it. The lid was gone, and inside, the bottom was layered with a reddish residue. She didn't need a field kit to know it matched the mineral bone mixture from the Station 3 locker. Ellison scanned the surrounding brush. Who's hauling drums up here? Not for fuel, Kane said. They were collecting something. 2 miles farther, the trail widened into a saddle between ridges. Here they found something far stranger, a ring of stones 15 feet across, each one upright, their tops leveled to match height. The moss-covered interior was sunken a foot below the surrounding ground, and in its center lay a post hole filled with shadow. Kane stepped carefully inside the ring, her boots sinking slightly in the damp soil. She knelt at the post hole, brushing aside leaves and old needles until she touched wood, not rotten, but dense and dark, preserved somehow against the elements. She scraped more away. The wood was carved, 3 circles, and in the center of the design, the same cross-hatched doorway she'd seen inside Thorndyke. Rose's voice was tight. "You seeing this?" Ellison didn't answer. His gaze had drifted past her, toward the far side of the ring. Kane followed his eyes and saw it, a boot print, deep and sharp in the moss. Not theirs. Too fresh. She straightened slowly, scanning the tree line. The moss muted sound, but she thought she caught the faint crack of a branch under weight. Nothing moved. They backed out of the ring. Kane pausing to mark the coordinates on her GPS. "We're coming back with more eyes," she said. The last half-mile to Station 3's ruins passed in wary silence. The collapsed structure looked unchanged from her last visit, the wood silvered and bowed, but something had been disturbed. A path of crushed grass and bent saplings led from the rear of the ruins to a small clearing about 20 yards off. In the center of the clearing lay a mound of stones, not a cairn in the typical sense. This was low, broad, and covered with a thin mat of moss that had been recently peeled back in one section. Kane knelt and touched the exposed earth. It was damp, smelling faintly of iron. She motioned for Rose's trowel. A few careful scrapes revealed fabric, dark, waxed canvas. Beneath it, the curve of a metal canister no bigger than a coffee tin. She worked it free and brushed off the soil. The lid bore the 3-circle symbol, pressed into the metal. When she pried it open, the smell hit first, dry, metallic, with a ghost of decay. Inside was a bundle of waxed cloth, and within that, a human finger bone wrapped with a strip of red cloth. Ellison swore under his breath. Kane rewrapped the bundle and sealed it in an evidence bag. "This wasn't here 50 years, she said. "The moss was too thin. Whoever left it came back recently." They stood in the clearing, the wind rising slightly through the spruce tops. Kane felt again the scent she'd had at the upright stones, a held breath. A pause before something resumed. On the hike back to Thorndyke, she kept glancing over her shoulder. Once, near the ring of stones, she thought she saw a shape between. The elders tall, narrow, not quite human in its stillness. But when she stopped to look, it was gone. That night, she logged the day's finds and sent photographs of the ring, the post-hole carving, and the canister to Dr. Shakes. The reply came 2 hours later. "You're standing on a boundary site." In Athabuscan tradition, these were gates. The carvings mark it as closed. If someone reopened it, be careful. The warning from Dr. Shakes stayed with Kane through the night. She'd reread the email until the words felt heavy in her chest. If someone reopened it, be careful. By morning, she'd decided to treat the site not just as an archaeological anomaly but as an active crime scene. The presence of the fresh boot print and the recently disturbed cairn meant someone had been moving through the Thorndyke Station 3 corridor within the past weeks, maybe even days. The first step was to cross-reference park entry logs. While most of Denali's backcountry had no formal checkpoints, Certain trailheads still required permits, even for seasoned locals. Kane pulled the Savage River register for the last 6 months. 4 names stood out. 3 were tourists with short itineraries, all checked back in. The 4th was different. Matthew Lorne, listed as independent hiker, no return recorded. Permit date, July 27th, only 10 days before Ellison's crew opened the hatch under Thorndyke. The name rang faintly in Kane's mind. She dug back into Naomi Harper's original 2012 case file. There it was. Lorne, Matthew, personal friend of Harper, resident of Anchorage, interviewed at time of disappearance, provided general background, stated he had hiked with victim on 2 previous Alaska trips. No evidence he'd been in Denali during her fatal trip. No further mention after that. Kane called Anchorage PD. Within an hour, Detective Leon Markham was on the line. Lauren, yeah, we know him. No recent charges, but odd guy, survivalist Ben, has a cabin way out near Talkeetna Spur Road, off most of the year. Any reason he'd be in Denali? Markham hesitated. He used to talk about the old ranger posts. Said he'd been to one in a storm with a friend, years back. Claimed it was different inside. You think he's tied to your body in the floor case? I think he might have been here before she died, Kane said. 2 days later, she and Ellison drove south to Talkeetna. The cabin was easy to miss, a squat, weathered structure set back from the road, half hidden behind a windbreak of spruce. There was no vehicle in sight, but a fresh track of mud-smeared footprints led from the porch to a shed 50 yards off. Kane knocked. No answer. She moved to the shed, finding the door unlocked. Inside, under a canvas tarp, were several objects that made her skin tighten. A coil of braided nylon cord, identical to Naomi's ligature. 2 coffee tins with lids stamped in crude hand-pressed 3-circle symbols. One was empty. The other, when she eased it open, contained nothing but reddish residue. A faded photograph tacked to the wall, showing a snow-covered ridgeline. In the bottom left, barely visible, was the outline of Thorndyke Ranger Station, and beside it, 2 upright stones. Ellison swore softly. He's been there. Kane bagged the tins and cord for evidence. On the way back to the truck, she noticed something scratched into the side of the porch beam, faint, but clear enough. He waits here. They left a request for contact and drove back north. But Kane's gut told her Lorne wouldn't be calling. By the time they reached Denali HQ, a report was waiting from the lab. The red cloth wrapped around the finger bone in the canister from Station 3 was a match for the fabric of Naomi Harper's parka. That night, unable to shake the sense of proximity, Kane went back to the ridge alone. The moon was low, the air brittle. She stopped at the upright stones and switched off her headlamp. The darkness felt dense, almost physical, pressing against her skin. Somewhere beyond the first bend in the trail, she heard the sound, slow, deliberate footsteps in moss. Too heavy for a fox, too measured for a moose. She crouched, letting her eyes adjust. A figure moved between the alders, tall shoulders slightly hunched. The moon caught on something in its hand, a length of cord swinging lightly. Kane's hand went to her sidearm. Lorne, she called. The figure froze. For a long moment, neither moved. Then it stepped backward into shadow, vanishing without a sound. She advanced to the spot, heart pounding, but found only the faint depression of boot prints in the moss, leading toward the stone ring. The wind shifted, carrying that metallic temps, again, stronger now, enough to sting her nose. She backed out to the trail, her skin prickling with the sense that whatever boundary Dr. Shakes had described was not entirely closed anymore. By dawn, Kane had already drafted the operational plan. They'd run a full sweep of the Thorndyke Station 3 corridor with a mixed team, law enforcement rangers, evidence techs, and 2 canine units trained for human remains detection. The search grid would extend a mile beyond the stone ring, overlapping the path. Lorne had likely taken when he slipped away the night before. Ellison reviewed the map over a thermos of coffee. "You're expecting him to come back." "I'm expecting him to have left something here worth protecting," Kane said. The sweep began mid-morning. The dogs moved with sharp purpose, noses low, tails stiff. By noon, one of them, a black lab named Yumi, signaled at the north side of Thorndyke's foundation. Just where the permafrost sunk sill met the ground, a tech with a spade began peeling back layers of soil and wind-blown debris. Less than 2 feet down, the blade struck metal. It was the corner of a weathered footlocker, its paint long gone, hinges fused with rust. Kane crouched as they worked it free and pried it open. Inside were 3 items, each wrapped in oiled cloth. A sidearm serial number worn, but still legible. Kane's pulse kicked when Ellison read it aloud. It matched the .357 registered to Naomi Harper, missing from her pack when her body was found. A journal, small, leather-bound, its pages swollen from moisture. The writing inside was cramped, almost obsessively neat. The first entries were dated 1967, signed W.A., later ones, from 1969, bore C.R. In between were notations of storms and offerings. Some entries listed names, all matching victims from the 60s case files, followed by short phrases like "the door holds" or "he waits satisfied." A recent Polaroid photograph dated August 3, 2020. It showed the stone ring near Station 3. Standing inside it was a man in modern hiking gear, face partially obscured by a hood. The hands were visible, and in the right, he held the same brass key Kane had found under Thorndyke's floor. Rowe leaned over the Polaroid. "That's Lorne." Kane didn't respond immediately. She was staring at the journal, at the way the entries jumped, decades with no change in tone. "Ames and Rudd kept this," she said. Then someone else, maybe Lorne, picked it up where they left off. That night, Kane sat in her field office and read through the journal in full. The earliest entries describe patrols to the ridge during blizzards, the collection of Mark's items taken from victims, and the use of red cloth to bind. Later entries spoke of the jar and bone meal for the line, referring to the mineral bone mix she'd seen twice now. The last page, in handwriting that did not match Ames or Rudd, read simply, "August soon. Door must open before first. Frost." The date was only weeks away. Kane called Dr. Shakes, summarizing what they'd found. On the other end of the line, there was a pause. "If they believe in opening that site," Shakes said, "it means they're trying to reverse what the symbols were meant to do, keep it closed. And if your man Lorne's been preparing, Naomi's death wasn't just murder, it was part of a ritual." The next morning, they pushed toward the stone ring with the full team. The air grew colder as they neared it, frost silvering the moss, even under direct sun. Inside the ring, the central post hole was no longer empty. A new post had been placed there, carved with the 3 circles, but this time the inner crosshatch doorway was missing. Ellison swore under his breath. "He's changing it." As the techs photographed the scene, Yumi the lab alerted again, this time at the ring's south edge. They dug carefully and uncovered another canister, newer than the last, its lid warm to the touch, despite the cold air. Kane opened it. Inside was a small bundle of cloth, and when she unwrapped it, her throat tightened. It was a photo of Naomi Harper, taken before her death. The background showed Thorndyke's doorway. Across the bottom, scrawled in pen, were the words, "She walks the ridge now." By nightfall, Kane had her command post running out of a portable shelter at the Thorndyke trailhead. Maps littered the tables, the Polaroid of Naomi pinned at the center. Every detail they'd uncovered now formed a lattice of time, place, and intent, and it all pointed to one conclusion. Lorne wasn't just haunting the ridge. He was staging something, a culmination of what Ames and Rudd had begun decades earlier. The first frost for this elevation typically fell in late August. That gave them just over 2 weeks. Kane pushed a briefing to the assembled team. We now believe the subject, Matthew Lorne, is attempting to perform a ritual act tied to the dismantling of the site's closure symbol. What the Athabascan record calls opening the door. His last movement through here was less than 4 hours ago. Our job is to locate him before he completes that act. Ellison added, he's not carrying this out in a random spot. Every canister, every carving we've found, is in line with the Thorndike Station 3 axis. We run patrols along that line until he slips. They deployed in staggered shifts. 2 teams circling the ring in the collapsed Station 3 site, 2 more sweeping the connecting trail. Drones were grounded at night due to the dense canopy, but thermal scopes were checked and rechecked. On the second night, just past 2 a.m., a ranger on the east sweep reported movement, a single heat signature pacing the ridge above Station 3. The team converged, but by the time they reached the spot, the figure had vanished. In his place they found a freshly dug hole less than a foot deep. Inside lay a strip of red cloth, knotted in the same loop as Naomi's ligature, weighted with a stone etched with the 3 circles. It was a marker, a signal. To Kane, it felt like Lorne was telling them he knew they were here. By day 5, tensions were high. The weather began its first true turn toward autumn, a cold drizzle muting the colors of the ridge. That evening, a tech at base intercepted an unencrypted radio transmission, a man's voice humming low, then speaking clearly. He waits here, as before. No origin could be triangulated, but the cadence was unmistakable. Kane made the call. They would push deep along the axis at first light, leapfrogging positions until they boxed him in. It was Ellison's unit that caught the break. They picked up a faint trail in the moss, prints leading downslope toward a narrow ravine. At the bottom ran a shallow creek, its banks cut with old frost heave, and there, tucked under an overhang, was a makeshift shelter of spruce boughs and a weather tarp. Inside, they found another brass key, identical to the one from Thorndike's floor, a jar half filled with bone meal mineral, and a folded map. The map was modern USGS, but in red pen, Lorne had marked the Thorndike Station 3 line, with a heavy circle drawn at a point between the two. Kane's eyes locked on the mark. She overlaid it mentally with her GPS logs. That point wasn't on any current trail. But in Ames's journal, there was an entry for February 3rd, 1968. High drift. Ultrasound. He waited satisfied. When they reached the coordinates that afternoon, the site revealed itself slowly through the fog, a depression in the earth ringed with stones. Larger than the one near Station 3, the moss inside flattened, as if recently trampled. At the center was a slab of rock, waist high, its surface smoothed by hands over years. On it lay a jar with its lid already removed. Inside was a mixture of bone meal and what looked like strands of human hair, dark and long. Kane felt her gut tighten. Ellison, standing beside her, whispered, "He's been here already." The drizzle thickened into rain, and the cold pushed in hard. Kane signaled the withdrawal, knowing they'd been hours too late. If Lorne had completed his offering, whatever he believed that meant, the next step would be at the stone ring, and they had no guarantee it wouldn't happen under cover of the next storm. Back at base, the forecast came in, a sharp temperature drop, snow possible on the ridge within 72 hours. Kane stared at the weather map. First frost was coming early. The storm announced itself before dawn, a low-pressure front sliding down from the Arctic, pulling the sky into a flat sheet of steel. Wind whipped through the spruce at Thorndike's back wall, rattling the old boards in a rhythm that seemed deliberate. The temperature fell fast by 10 a.m. The thermometer at base read 26 degrees, wind chill in the teens. Kane had moved her command post up the ridge, as close to the stone ring as they dared, without being seen. A perimeter of plainclothes rangers and techs ringed the site at staggered intervals. Thermal scopes scanned the trail from Thorndike, others the approach from Station 3's ruins. At 11:47 a.m., a faint heat signature appeared on the western ridge. Ellison's voice came over the comm, one figure tall, movements steady, toward the ring. Kane moved low through the moss, keeping her line of sight clear. The figure resolved slowly through the curtain of snow, hooded, carrying a long bundle wrapped in canvas. Even through the distortion of wind and sleet, she knew it was Lorne. He entered the stone ring without hesitation. From her vantage, Kane could see the central post had been stripped of the closure carving entirely. The 3 circles remained, but the inner crosshatch door was gone. Lorne knelt, unwrapping the canvas. Inside was the slab from the altar site, somehow hauled here in the last day. He set it in the post hole and placed a jar, bone meal, minerals, and hair on. Kane signaled her team to move. They came in from 3 sides, weapons drawn, voices raised over the wind. Matthew Lorne. Step away from the post. He didn't startle. He looked up at Kane with the faintest smile. You're late, he said. His voice was calm, conversational, as if they were meeting in a grocery store aisle. Kane advanced, covering him with her sidearm. Put your hands where I can see them. Lorne set the jar down gently, then straightened. You think this is about me? It never was. Ames knew, Rudd knew, she knew. Naomi Harper. His smile widened. She wasn't a sacrifice. She was the key. Blood, cloth, bone. The ridge keeps what it's owed. I'm just here to make sure the door opens again. The wind hit hard from the north, snow swirling so thick Kane could barely see Ellison moving in from her left. Lorne reached for something at his belt, a brass key, identical to the ones they'd found. Kane closed the gap in 2 strides, knocking it from his hand. Ellison took him down in a tackle that sent both men crashing into the moss. The key skittered to a stop against the post. Just as the jar toppled and spilled its contents onto the slab, the change was instant. The air inside the ring dropped 10 degrees. The wind outside seemed to cut off, leaving only a deep, low sound like something breathing under the earth. The frost on the stones thickened before their eyes. Get him out, Kane snapped. 2 rangers dragged Lorne to the perimeter, cuffed and shouting incoherently about first frost and owing the ridge. Kane grabbed the jar, scooping the spilled contents back inside, heart hammering. She signaled for the techs with the closure seal. They'd prepped a carved plug of spruce, bearing the full 3 circle with door symbol. Cut to fit the post. Together they drove it in, wedged and weighted with stone. The sound faded. The frost on the stones stopped thickening. The air eased back toward normal cold. By the time they reached base, Lorne had gone silent, eyes fixed on some point far beyond the tent walls. He refused to speak again, even under direct questioning. The forensic work tied him to Naomi's death in ways even he couldn't deny. His DNA under her fingernails, her blood uncored from his taquitna shed, trace bone meal mineral from the ridge in the treads of his boots. But the why, the full belief system behind Ames, Rudd, and now Lorne, was only partially illuminated by the journal. Most of it remained in fragments, storms as signals, offerings as currency, the ridge as something that could be owed. Naomi Harper was buried in Oregon that October. Kane attended in plain clothes, standing at the edge of the crowd with Ellison. Snow had already dusted the mountains back in Alaska. Before she left Denali for her next case, she hiked once more, to Thorndike. The cabin was scheduled for demolition in spring, but for now it stood in the brittle sunlight, empty. She stepped between the upright stones, felt the air cool, and stared down the trail toward Station 3. The wind shifted and carried nothing but the dry scent of spruce and snow. Still, she thought of the old Athabascan word, Kayavik, the place where he waits, and wondered whether they had closed the door for good or merely bought themselves another winter.